thank you for being here this morning. I want to talk about a lot of things, but I know we have limited time. One topic that is very hot and it's going to become even more popular in the state of Florida is energy. And one thing that I learned that I was blown away is the amount of money companies are losing for something as simple as a spike in the transmission of electricity from a millisecond to a second. I think that companies are losing anywhere between $119 million to $119 billion all the way to $188 billion per year. And I was not aware of that. And then I started thinking about capacitor. And I think that's a type of solution that you may be able to bring to the table. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. It is correct. There's multiple layers to this problem. Right? So ultimately what you're talking about is power quality. Right? Is voltage what it's supposed to be on the grid, in the building, in the facility? And if it's not, then what are the ramifications? So one ramification is, well, maybe there's a nuisance trip. Maybe something goes down. If you stop running your production line, then you're not generating revenue from producing whatever you're producing. If you're running a data center, well, those are data centers that's services that aren't being provided. Either which way, that's a loss of money. But that's not the total scope of the problem. At the same time, these a voltage sag or a voltage spike, power quality in general, distortions in frequency, that can lead to premature equipment failure.
Right.
Well, so now someone's got to pay to replace that equipment. Maybe it's the utility, maybe it's the business owner, but someone's going to have to maintain and eventually replace that equipment from repeated and prolonged power quality issues. And then there's a third aspect, which is simply poor design in the first place of oversizing generation or oversizing battery energy storage assets to try to address some of these issues. And the reality is that's capital spent that will need to be recouped at some point that maybe could have been optimized to both address the problem and also keep the economics in check. Okay.
Now, does your technology, I understand it's storage energy, but would a storage energy in a sense of, like, for example, yesterday in Texas, there was a dump of about 5,000 megawatts of power. I don't know exactly the amount, but it was the size of El Paso. And what that means is that electricity have to go somewhere and basically ended up damaging manufacturing facilities, equipment in the houses. So does your solution prevent from that happening? Or okay.
Yeah, it does. So what Capacitech produces, we make a supercapacitor system that is designed for high voltage, high power applications. This would be grids, microgrids, industrial facilities. When it comes to energy storage, though, energy storage is typically spoken about in the terms of batteries, where it's energy storage for an hour, energy storage for 30 minutes. Nowadays, with companies like CM Blue, energy storage for half a day, full day, right? So, when we talk about energy storage, our minds tend to go to the hours scale. But the reality is that you can store energy for just 1 second, or maybe it's even 200 milliseconds, or maybe it's 5 seconds. Supercapacitors are an energy storage technology that are really good at providing that few second, 100 millisecond type energy storage. And it can ultimately be a bridge to the longer lasting energy storage assets like a battery, which then be a bridge to even longer lasting energy storage assets like long duration batteries. So when you're talking about like, hey, there's a power quality event, it's 5 cycles long, or it's a 2-second surge in demand, or maybe it's a 2-second surge in generation and there's no demand to take it. Something that's really unique about supercapacitors is that they can both serve as an energy storage asset where they're delivering the energy. They can also be configured to be essentially a load where they take on a lot of energy.
That's cool.
Right? It can go either which way. In traditional battery technologies, that's not the case. You can typically charge at one rate and discharge at another. Yes. Generally, you discharge at a higher power rate, at a higher level of power or faster rate than you charge. With supercapacitors, you can charge and discharge at the same rate. It's a symmetric mechanism. There's no consequence or trade-off for the rate that you charge at versus you discharge at. And so it can really be effectively used as both a source as well as a load. And we actually demonstrated that in our project with Sandia National Labs and Orlando Utilities Commission, where we used a supercapacitor system made by Capacitech called the C-Link. We mounted that on the backside of some electrical paneling, and it was really interesting because we were able to black start the microgrid using these C-Link supercapacitor systems. So the way that we did that is we opened all the circuit breakers to the loads downstream, which were EV chargers, and we had the C-Link and the power converter form a microgrid to provide a power signal to a solar array. Well, after 5 minutes, IEEE regulations say that solar array can now start to add power to the system, so its inverter starts to inject power. And in this moment, the supercapacitor system goes from being a power source, forming the grid, to being a load to take all of that energy from solar.
Oh, that's cool.
And then, once we've done that, now we have the ability to close those circuit breakers and use the supercapacitor to provide that rush of power needed to energize the transformers and to turn on all the loads downstream, at which point the solar can be curtailed to match the demand of the load. And so this is a unique phenomenon where you can use a supercapacitor that's not grossly oversized or anything of that nature to handle a black start scenario where you're using it as an energy storage source to form the microgrid, and then immediately turn around and use it as a load to take all that excess energy coming from the solar array that there was no load for.
Yeah, so the deployment of this solution that you created, and we'll get into that in a minute, but it could be easily installed, or do we need to now hire in a team of engineers, architects, and kind of like rebuild what we already built 5 years ago?
Great question. So it's actually a major focus of what we do at Capacitech. So Capacitech, we really focus on the packaging, the integration, and the deployment of supercapacitors. We want to make supercapacitors practical to install in high voltage, high power applications like grids, microgrids, and data centers, industrial facilities. Well, supercapacitors are components. You can't plug a component into those grids, into the grid. You can't plug a component into those systems. And so you need to be able to integrate and deploy them properly. And that's what Capacitech focuses on. So we really noticed that there were two primary bottlenecks to adopting supercapacitors in those applications. The first is that the packaging. Right? It needs to be modular and needs to not compete with other equipment for space. So for example, you've got a 10-foot by 10-foot electrical pad. You want to put your transformers and your batteries and potentially your supercapacitors all there. Okay, well, on that pad, you might have to choose, do I want to have another battery cabinet or do I want to put a supercapacitor? That creates these negative design trade-offs. That's not good. In a data center, you have a fixed amount of space for your electrical room. Do I want to use this footprint to install batteries or supercapacitors? Do I want to add a switchboard? Do I need to make the room larger to make room to add these additional equipment needed to handle the AI workloads of today's load profile? And so with Capacitech, we said, all right, we're going to take the package, and we're not going to offer a big cabinet. We're going to offer a conduit-style solution that can be mounted on the wall that only protrudes 6 inches off. So now we can turn fences, cable trays, walls into space for power resilience assets so that they're not competing for space with other equipment, whether that's IT compute capacity or batteries or whatever might be needed.
So real estate is not a problem. You can actually put this in fences, on walls, and mount it there.
That's right.
Okay, good.
That's right. Then the second half of this is, well, we need to be able to manage that power properly. And as a result, a lot of supercapacitors, since they're made at the component level, you would need to do a custom engineering process to make the equivalent of the battery management system for the supercapacitor. And when those processes were being done, the supercapacitor applications were intermittent. There would be minutes or maybe even hours between load profiles. With AI, it's not like that. It's every 10 seconds there's another demand and surge. So we need to be able to quickly manage the power in the supercapacitor so that it is ready to go. And so that's another aspect that we really focused on, is how do we make power management that's modular and scalable, that doesn't require custom engineering, maybe some napkin math, oh, we need this number of modules or something of that nature, but not go through a complete engineering design process with a large team that's going to take several months of studies. We want to make supercapacitors effective, deployable, and make sure that they're bankable and can be deployed in the time scale that's allotted for them.
All right. Now, so when you say, well, when you use the word supercapacitor, even though it's super and it's bigger than the first MVP that you created, I smile because I remember your first presentation, the one I attended a few years back, and you had just a typical cell phone charger.
Yeah.
And I think you were using that to demonstrate that you can convert that into a capacitor, or you can hold charge within that cable.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the creation of the supercapacitor and where did you start it, and you ended up pivoting, right? So give us a little bit more information about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a long path, right?
Yeah.
We originally identified a technology at the University of Central Florida. I was doing work in the undergraduate research lab that invented this first concept of what if a wire could store energy. And I think the inventor, Dr. J.N. Thomas, if I remember the story right, he's driving to work and he's noticing all the power lines down University Boulevard. And he goes, what if that could store energy, right? And I was still in high school at that point, right? So I get no credit for the concept. I want to make sure everyone knows that that was his vision. However, when it came to actually commercializing that concept, that's more where I played that larger role of, okay, how do we make this suitable to customers? And where we started was we made a wire-shaped, flexible supercapacitor component. And when we would talk to customers, we went through the I-Core program, both the local UCF cohort and the national cohort. We would talk to customers, and they would say, oh, my gosh, like this could save a lot of space. I was like, yeah, it can. But what I didn't appreciate is the professional risk that I was asking them to take on by putting forth a completely new kind of component that would require their engineering teams to do all the design work to be able to adopt it. I didn't consider the aspect of, well, we need to be able to manufacture this at scale, and in order to do that, I need somebody that's going to be willing to say, I'll buy, 1 million, but to say that they're going to buy 1 million, they need to probably see a factory so that the professional risk is addressed. Yeah. And so it became this really tough challenge of getting that initial technology lined up with what customers could actually buy and move forward. And so in 2022, we really started to recognize that what our customers were asking for is, hey, I need a way to complement batteries, to complement generation. I need a way to deploy this practically. I can't do all the engineering myself. I need a total package. I don't need a component. And so we said, okay, we got a call from Red Bull, 2022. Hey, we're going to have this event in the middle of the desert. We're going to have battery generators. It's going to charge a drone, and then the drone has to fly. Can you make sure that that battery generator works? And I said, of course, yes, sir. And we, in 2 weeks, put together a initial MVP of this system approach where we used existing commercial off-the-shelf supercapacitors packaged into a cable form factor with our power management and integrated with a power converter to be able to couple it all together on the same voltage bus. We get there, drove across the country in a Penske rental van with my wife. We get there, we deploy it, and sure enough, that the battery generator was not able to charge the drone on its own, but when connected to the drone through our system, it was able to charge the drone. And that was good because it turns out that drone was a result of a very large sponsorship deal between T-Mobile and Red Bull and all these folks. And it's like, I'm really, really glad that cool. that we were there to make sure that that was successsul.
And was that your first commercial experience where you deployed the solution out there in the field?
Yeah, it was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was our first
with Red Bull. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. But, it was our first commercial experience in high voltage, high power, I'd say. We had done some work in Internet of Things devices with the component, the wire-shaped component. We had done some work in some AR, VR, and wearable projects, but when it came to high voltage, high power application where you're talking about kilowatts, that was our introduction to the show. You know, gotta keep in mind though, my first job was in surge protection, so in a lot of ways, I really wanted to get back to those single line diagrams and talking about kilovolts and things of that nature. That's where I fell in love with power and energy, and you know, that became very clear to me that this was a real problem of we need supercapacitors. We don't know how to deploy them effectively. There's not existing off-the-shelf solutions to deploy them effectively in these high voltage, high power applications. And our approach made that very, very feasible. And I'd add in one more thing that, you know, really what we're doing is trying to take supercapacitors and bring them to a mainstream market, not much different than how Fluence did for the battery industry, right? Fluence offered modular packaged battery solutions for these high voltage, high power clients like utilities and industrial facilities. And we're doing that very much in a similar way for supercapacitor technology. The technologies are different, so the problems faced are a little bit different, so the product is quite different. But the focus and the emphasis of what we're doing, making them practical and deployable, is very much the same.
Let's go back to those days where you were going through the I-Core program, both local and the local program and the national program, and you're talking to potential users, and you're learning from them, right? Tell me about Joe back then, because you probably came, you know, with this idea that you had the perfect product, and as you start getting information from them, how do you manage that, not only internally as a business owner, inventor, but also as a leader for your company?
Boy, did I have a lot to learn. I had vision and I had ambition, but it was not refined. And I'm very grateful to the many mentors that poured into me. Probably, if I had to name one, Richard Fox has been working with me for over 10 years now.
Wow. Yeah, I know
and
Richard.
I'm very, very grateful. And it's funny because I'll be going about my day and I'll say something. I'm like, man, that sounds like Richard 8 years ago or something like that. So I'm very, very grateful to the many people that poured into me during this process because, you know, I started Capacitech as a sophomore in college. I had a lot of growing and maturing to do in order to be successful in what we're doing, and that's where we are now. I would probably say the thing that I was missing the most at that time was empathy for the customer, the professional risk I was asking them to take. I couldn't understand that because I didn't have a corporate job.
Right.
So I didn't understand what I couldn't fathom what it was like to be in their shoes. I couldn't appreciate what I was asking them to do. Secondly, I didn't have an appreciation for the sales process, meaning the process of navigating complex organizations to actually get something done.
Yeah.
And I know that when I started the company, my thought was I need to educate people about the product. I need to sell the product. I didn't see that my job was to partner with the customer to help them buy the product. I thought that I was trying to convince them that they needed this. It was less about that and more helping them go through the process of justifying that they need this internally, right? So that's a minor perspective shift that I think had a very large impact in the way that Capacitech ultimately comes about.
Yeah, and I think it's paying off because not only have you been able to, I guess, find the right pathway forward, but you were just selected Forbes magazine 30 under 30. Yeah. How does that feel?
We still don't know who nominated me, so I give credit to Jesus Christ. I'm pretty sure Jesus nominated me. That was bewildering, right? When that first email came through, it's one of those things where you're like, oh, that's spam. And like, I think a half day later, it's like, was that spam? I go back, I'm like, no, that says at Forbes.com. I don't think that was I don't think that was spam. And you start to look into it, and Brandon Carpenter, he was a Forbes 30 under 30 nominee years before me, and I called him and was like, hey, does this look like how it looked for you? And he was like, I mean, it's a little bit more put together, but yeah. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is this happening?
Wow.
And so, we went through a little questionnaire, and I worked with Alan at the business incubator to kind of, hey, how do these responses look from your perspective as a PR person? And ultimately was selected to Forbes 30 under 30 list for my division, which was energy and green tech, and that was just so cool.
Yeah.
My wife and I went to New York to participate in the celebration, and it's just even more cool to see Derek from Source there.
Yeah,
because it's like, man, like we were working together at the Blackstone Launchpad, right? Like I remember when you guys were doing drone carbon fiber frames, and it's just like just to see another one of your like entrepreneurial brothers in a way, like at that event was really, really rewarding, very, very humbling, because you don't start a company thinking Forbes going to notice.
Right.
And then Forbes notices, and you go, oh, okay.
So that's the cool thing about you, man, is that I know that since high school, you've been leaning towards entrepreneurship and business. And you mentioned that when the solution came into place, you were in 10th grade in high school, or you were still in high school.
So I started my first company at 15, 16 years old.
Okay.
That was a hands-free fitness product. And
that's right.
And that was very fun. Capacitech, I started as a sophomore in college.
Okay. Right.
Which I used the initial success of my first business to fund the first summer of my endeavor at Capacitech.
And then when you went through all this program and you got tons of help, you got a village behind you. But the cool thing about it and I don't know if you realize how mature you actually were back then, to be able to listen, to be able to, adapt to your findings, and you're still here, you're still at it. And on top of that, you were able to raise money, right? Because people think that, well, I have a great idea, people are going to buy it, but it's very complicated. And you successfully were able to raise capital. And so how do you balance that, right? Because I seen companies that they start chasing money, and they don't stop, and they forget about selling, and then they crash. So tell me about that experience. I mean, so you got selected for 30 under 30. You won several awards. You have a great solution. You got Red Bull testing your equipment, and then how do you take it to market?
Yeah, well, we gotta start earlier to get to that, to get all those answers covered. For one, I remember in high school, my dad told me if I want to be successful, I need to surround myself with experts in their field. He said, you don't have to listen to them. You need to listen to all of them and then make the decision that only you have all of the context to make. And he says that a lot, even still to this day. So yeah, it's good advice. You need to be humble enough to know I don't have all the answers, but you need to be confident enough to try, right? And have strong enough faith that, hey, good things can happen. And good things happen to those who try, right? The Teddy Roosevelt quote, like, get in the arena, get punched in your face, and keep getting back up. And from the initial product prototypes from 7 to 8 years ago to what we're doing now with large corporations and very large projects and high voltage, high power applications, it's very fun, very exciting, and it's been an honor to work alongside people on my team to be able to see them, to see all that to fruition. And then additionally, when I started my first company in the 15, I remember starting the company at 15, and I remember forming the company at 16, right? So I'm 16 years old. I've been given $10,000 as an award to start this business, and I remember sitting in the this school conference room, and they said, okay, Joe, so you won the competition. Which university do you want us to send this to? And I was confused. I was like, well, I'm going to, the money, it's not a scholarship. I thought this was a cash prize. I didn't think this was a scholarship. And the guy that funded the prize kind of starts chuckling, and he's like, let's let them start the business. And so I used the money to start the business, and I knew I would have bright futures and things of that nature. And so I started the business, and I got to work directly with him. Kurt Long, successful CEO, recently exited his company for a very large sum, and really honored to be directly mentored by someone of his caliber for probably 2 or 3 years before I moved to go to college. Stay in touch with him still to this day. But even just my dad saying to a 15-year-old, you need to get a lot of advice before you make a decision. And that is something that I still hold true to this day. So then, if you fast forward, we've done our first deployment with Red Bull, got some data, showed, hey, supercapacitors, it injects high power. It can complement a battery. It can complement solar generation at that time, to address some of these demanding loads. For Red Bull, it was a drone. That was our testing ground. But the reality is we wanted to go address the demand that comes from large pumps and now data centers. And so when we did that project in 2022, we pivoted and we said, okay, this approach works. Off-the-shelf supercaps, our power management, our packaging, and existing power converters. That's the formula. So we spent 2023 just full design into that. And in 2024, we were given the opportunity to work with the Department of Energy and Orlando Utilities Commission to deploy another solution in a 480-volt three-phase microgrid. Okay, a little bit higher, right? The next rung of the ladder. And from there, we followed that up with a project with Sandia National Labs to upgrade that system to be a little higher power, but more importantly, a more sophisticated packaging, where it would be a 4-foot conduit, 6-inch diameter, the product that we sell today. And we got to develop that product in partnership with utilities, in partnership with National Labs. And, our next project is with an even larger utility. And so really, really excited about the way that we just kept doing the next right thing, right? Yeah. And when it comes to raising capital, it's the same conversation. It's, okay, we're doing the next right thing. It's not, will you invest to keep the lights on for 3 more months? That's not the situation. The situation is, we have this value-generating milestone. I'm using language from Mike Pape, UCF professor. Grateful for his mentorship as well. And he talked a lot about value-generating milestones. So it's like, okay, we need to reach this value-generating milestone. In order to get there, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And this is how much it'll cost. Will you invest to help us accomplish those tasks, to hit this inflection point, this value-generating milestone, that allows us to either raise more capital, close a significant sale, file specific intellectual property, things of that nature. Because what you're doing is you're creating a track record, and I think this is very important,
yes,
of saying what you'll do and then doing it, right? And so you don't necessarily, the way Capacitech had raised its funding, I mean, we did a small round in 2020. My first investor was my high school physics teacher, $25,000. Very grateful to her, and very excited for the day that I return many multiples of that back to her. And, I go, okay, so those first investors, they're excited by the vision, they're excited by the entrepreneur. But then as you keep going down the pathway, and then you start to realize, okay, this isn't about raising money for fun, this is about raising money for progress. And so what I would get into a habit of doing is I would do something like the Florida Venture Forum, not because I'm trying to win $25,000, but because I want to stand on the stage and tell everyone, over the next 6 months, we're focused on these things. And then I want to run into those same people in 6 months and say, we did them. Right? Because now you're creating a history of, this is a team that executes, that identifies what the steps are to success, knows what it'll take to accomplish them, and then ultimately sees that through. And so that's been that's pretty much how we've raised our money. And we haven't raised a Silicon Valley style round where we raised a couple $1 million in one sitting. Total raise was maybe $2.5 million with non-dilutive grants in there, right? So we've been very lean in the way that we raised, but you know what? You got to know your industry.
Right.
We're in an industry that has a 12 to 18 month sales cycle. If I go raise a little bit of money and I go hire 5 salespeople, if we don't have the milestones and the capital to go through that full 18-month process, we're not going to survive it, right? So you have to be really strategic in what investments are you making. And in the power industry, it's naturally conservative. The sales process is complicated. You don't need a massive team. You need direction, focus, adaptability, and it pays well to credibility, actually, is a really large one. Part of why the Sandia project is so important is it brings that credibility. And so we go, okay, this is less about trying to rush to the market, right? This isn't a software or SaaS platform where speed is focus. The focus is we need to keep doing the next right thing commercially. We bring investors in to support that process. Maybe it's an investment for intellectual property, or maybe it's an investment for product certifications, right? But we're gonna keep doing the next right thing, and as a result, it all aggregates to, hey, you've been supporting this customer for 2 years, and now you have completed the due diligence process, and there's a very large order here, right? So, if we were to hire many people and burn through cash really, really quickly, the company wouldn't have gotten the chance to satisfy all of those requirements that a customer puts forth, all of the steps that are involved with a product commercialization roadmap and things of that nature. So, that's ultimately been our playbook for both developing sales as well as developing investors. Collaboration mindset, partnership mindset, keep doing the next right thing, help people with their job, and in return, you'll be doing yours.
Yeah. So one more question, and then I want to jump into the next segment. But do you think that the energy industry they're not that easy to bring new technology into their systems, or what have been your experience?
So it's an interesting question. When it comes to delivering power, it's dangerous. It's also mission critical. So you don't just go trying things on a whim. So it's not a open innovation, let's just see what happens kind of mentality. However, the industry is also one that is hungry because they see the exponentially rising demand. They see aging infrastructure. They know how important it is for projects to be bankable. And so an entrepreneur in this space needs to think less about what does the customer need, but what can the customer buy? And obviously you need to solve a need in order for them to buy it, right? Mm-hmm. So let's not conflate the two. But what Capacitec's done a lot of work in is how can we match our product roadmap to the risk profile of the customer. And so, for example, you mentioned that early prototype where we used our technology to turn a phone charger into an energy storage asset. That's awesome. That is Capacitec's ultimate vision, is to turn the world's wire and cabling infrastructure into power resilience assets. But do you think a data center is going to let me replace their mission-critical power pathway on their first deployment? That's pretty hard, right? And so our systems connect in parallel, meaning we connect to the critical power pathway, but we are not the critical power pathway.
Right.
And so you need to match the risk profile of the customer. I mentioned that we use off-the-shelf cells. Some people go, oh, well, what's your competitive advantage? Our competitive advantage is the form factor to be able to increase compute capacity in your data center, or to be able to retrofit your microgrid without needing to pour new concrete pads, or to get significant construction permits, or to redesign and reconfigure the whole system, right? Instead, it's, we can upgrade that. So the form factor, that is an innovation. But using commercial off-the-shelf cells that have been produced for decades and an off-the-shelf power converter that has already been tested and certified and is already deployed in other facilities or other systems that are in their operation, that matches the risk profile of what the customer can take. That is, to me, a very, very simple innovation, and then it can grow from there, right? They become comfortable with the conduit, then maybe part two is that conduit slowly makes its way into becoming the critical power pathway, and that is the ultimate vision, but that vision is going to take many years to accomplish.
Yeah.
Right? So, yes, this is a complex space. Yes, this is a conservative space, but this is also a space that is mission-critical infrastructure, and infrastructure that's dangerous if not handled properly. So you need to understand where the customer's coming from versus just being like, well, this is obviously the better way to go. Okay. And if you are working on something like maybe it's a solid state transformer where, wow, like this by definition, this is going to be in series with the critical power pathway. So what do you do then? You got to pick the right customers. Your first customer is probably not a hyperscale or, it's probably more of a neo cloud provider that's looking for really hungry and advanced technology because they have a very specific set of problems that only the most advanced technologies can fix, right? So you need to identify who is my customer,
right?
What is their risk profile, and either design to that or match that, but at the bare minimum, you got to keep that into consideration because you got to maintain that empathy. Otherwise, you'll just be frustrated. Well, why aren't they buying my product? This is obviously better. Take a second, trying to think about it from their perspective. There's probably a reason.
Cool. So what's next for Capacitec, or where do you see Capacitec 5 years from now?
Yeah, so we have a very strong growth by partnership mindset. So where I see us growing is we're going to continue to serve data centers and industrial facilities, grids, microgrids, as we are today. We are going to lean into some of these partnerships and jointly develop products that can use the brand credibility of Capacitec and our technology, but also of our partners to be able to slowly make our way into the busway of a data center in the white space, or to slowly start to combine the power distribution infrastructure with the power resilience infrastructure, so that while they're building these facilities, they can deploy two assets at once, both power distribution and power resilience and by our energy storage technology. So, really that's where we see ourselves growing, is steering into these partnerships that are being formed today and using those partnerships to deploy in ways that Capacitec would not be able to on its own, and in markets or in customer profiles that we would not be able to support on our own.
All right. Well, thank you so much for all this information. We're a big fan. You've done very well for yourself, and I don't know, sometimes that's hard to see it, right? Because but from this side of the fence, we are, we're your champions, and we applaud you all the way, and hopefully you can make it to that next goal, which I think you will pretty soon. And I wish you the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafael. I appreciate being here. Great questions and good conversation.
All right.